for hopefully the special town meeting we'll have in June.
Thank you. Any further discussion in the red microphone against indefinitely postponing Article 22? Any discussion at the Mr. Smith against, at the red microphone, indefinitely postponing Article 22?
I would suggest if you want to do something and not have this issue go away, that you just...
Sorry? This is on a motion to substitute. The motion is to indefinitely postpone Article 22. Mr. Smith.
It would seem that it would be in the best interests of everyone involved that you just defer this article instead of indefinitely postpone it. If you defer it, then at least you give yourselves a month to have the language that you seek, and it also keeps it in the minds of this town meeting, since we just went through the thing on Article 21. Otherwise, you're talking about a separate special meeting that's either in the fall or next year.
Thank you. Anybody at the green microphone or wishes to speak in favor of the motion? Mr. Garrity, for the second time.
Former Selectman, we did consider deferring it until the end, which would have put it up in June. When we have the special town meeting planned, we will have to have another special town meeting anyway. We have some issues with the 115 project that we definitely will need another town meeting for within the confines of this continued town meeting. So we're not losing any time.
Thank you, Mr. Garrity. Any further discussion at the red microphone? Mr.
Yes.
Burke.
Respectfully, if we're IPing this one, but we've deferred all others to June, why didn't we IP the budget and all other things? Because supposedly we're going to have a June meeting. Thank you.
Thank you. Any further discussion at the green microphone? The pending motion is to substitute to indefinitely postpone Article 22. Does anybody wish to speak at the green microphone who's not yet had a chance to speak? Anybody wish to speak at the red microphone has not yet had a chance to speak? If you vote yes, you're voting in favor of the substitute motion to indefinitely postpone Article 22. At that point, that will be the motion before town meeting. We'll have any further discussion and then put it to a final vote. If you vote no, you're voting against indefinitely postponing, and we'll go back and continue the discussion of Article 22 as printed in the warrant with those minor amendments. All in favor of the amendment to indefinitely postpone, say aye. Aye. Opposed, no? No. I'll have to have a standing vote. It's a majority vote to substitute. All in favor of indefinitely postponing Article 22, please stand. All, thank you. You may be seated. All opposed, please stand. Thank you. It is a majority vote in favor of the motion to indefinitely postpone. I will count it at the request of any 7 voters. The motion now pending before town meeting is to indefinitely postpone Article 22. Is there any further discussion for or against the motion to indefinitely postpone Article 22? Hearing none, if you vote yes, you're voting to IP, indefinitely postpone Article 22. If you're voting no, you're voting not to do that at this time. All in favor, say aye. Opposed, no? No. It is a majority vote. Article 22 is indefinitely postponed. Article 23, Mr. Birmingham.
Mr. Moderator, point of order. It seems to me that Article 23 may want to be considered to be indefinitely postponed as well, in light of the
Birmingham,
previous vote.
it's not a point of order, but the question that you raise is, since Article 23 mirrors Article 22 with respect to home rule language, the proponent here is the Economic Development Committee. Does the Economic Development Committee wish also to IP Article 23, or they wish to press it at this time? Mr. Nicodemus, Economic Development Committee.
Yes, the Economic Development Committee is in favor of indefinitely postponing this one. We would have asked that anyhow because there is some additional research that needs to be done.
Thank you. It'll be accepted as a friendly substitute motion by the proponent. Is there a second to that motion? The motion by the Economic Development Committee, Article 23, is to indefinitely postpone Article 23. Was there a second for the record?
Second.
Thank you. Any further discussion in favor of indefinitely postponing Article 23? Any discussion against indefinitely postponing Article 23? If you vote yes, you're voting to IP, to indefinitely postpone Article 23. If you vote no, you're voting to the contrary. All in favor say aye. Aye. Opposed, no? Article 23 is indefinitely postponed. Article 24 was dispensed in the consent calendar. We'll move now to Article 25. Mr. Birmingham, Advisory Board.
Mr. Moderator, I move to approve Article 25 as printed in the warrant.
Thank you. Mr. Birmingham, Advisory Board recommendation.
Petitioners have submitted two Articles 25 and 26 for consideration by town meeting that address more disciplined and sustained funding of road maintenance in town. In fiscal 2002, the town approved creation and funding of a road stabilization fund. Since that time, the road program has expended $2,101,788 of a proposed $2,620,858 program. Of the $519,070 difference, the funding shortfall since 2002, $356,606 occurred last year as town meeting eliminated funding for the road program to cover a deficit in the town operating budget. The 2010 budget also eliminated the funding. Creation of a stabilization fund would assure continued funding of road improvements because withdrawal would require a two-thirds vote of town meeting. If funded, the amounts would be drawn from these funds and combined with the Chapter 90 funds from the state and DPW road program budget to execute the road program.
Thank you, Mr. Birmingham. This is an article submitted by petition. Does the lead petitioner wish to speak to the matter, Ms.? Please step forward.
Yes, I do, Mr. Moderator. Good evening. My name is Marguerite Kevorkian-Berkner, and I live on Wampanoag Ave. I am here tonight to address Article 25 regarding the Road Maintenance Stabilization Fund. I want to thank the petitioners and the many supporters. I'm disappointed that again this year the selectmen were not planning to budget money for road repair. The only way we could address this issue was to initiate a petition for a stabilization fund, allowing all of us to speak about our roads and the need for maintenance and repair now. I understand that we have other priorities, but this year especially, the roads seem to be at their all-time worst. I also realize that this is not the best time for funding due to the financial crisis we are all in. But let's face it, it's never a good time. This sentiment is not just mine, but many of yours too. I'm concerned not just for our cars, but for the safety of those who walk and ride cycles. Many of you have shared stories about major car repairs, and others have said that the children can't walk or ride their bicycles safely. Bus drivers have said that the roads are difficult to drive. And how would you like to ride the ambulance when ill or injured over these roads? Realtors have said that potential buyers and sellers are concerned about the impact of the condition of the road as it affects home value. Even tonight, officers shared with me how difficult the drive is because of the roads. The roads are one of our major assets, and shouldn't we take pride in our home and community? The Road Stabilization Fund is not the road program. Like the Vehicle Stabilization Fund, any monies in the fund are solely used for road repair, rebuilding, and maintenance, period. You may ask, why wasn't this done before? Well, in 2001, when the road program was established, stabilization funds were not available. But state laws have changed to allow the creation of these types of funds now. You all knew how important the road repair was in 2001, and in good faith established the program. I ask you again to support this stabilization fund. Only this time, you can be assured that the money that goes in only comes out by your vote at town meeting, and again, only for road repair. When meeting with the advisory committee, it became clear that how we and members of the advisory committee envisioned the Road Maintenance Stabilization Fund to fix roads was not how the DPW did. The DPW thought it would be great to add these proposed funds to the Chapter 90 money and any other money that was budgeted and then continue to do the same thing. Well, that hasn't worked and won't work to get our fair, poor, and failed roads. Therefore, an amendment is needed to clarify the intent of this fund. I hope you had the opportunity to view the lists of road segments and their condition indexes on your way into town meeting. I'd like to thank Bob McGee, Superintendent of DPW, who did an excellent job in compiling these lists. My first slide, thank you. 52% of our roads are fair or worse. We are told that the new and obviously the gravel roads need no maintenance. So that concludes that the majority of the road maintenance money is going to 37% of our roads, equaling 28.4 miles out of a 76.6 miles. There is never money available for the roads in the worst condition. Therefore, they will be the last to be served, quote unquote. If you don't live on a bad road, I'm sure you must drive or cross over more than one in your daily journey. Next slide, please. We spend approximately $300,000 per year on road maintenance. According to the DPW, to properly repair and maintain the town's roads, given their current condition, it would cost approximately $12 million. Next slide, please. I'm asking you now to vote to create a road maintenance stabilization fund. I feel this fund is critical for Norfolk's future. By voting for this article tonight, it would establish the fund. It does not cost anything to establish the fund, and I thank you.
Thank you, Ms. Kevorkian. Anybody wish to speak at the red microphone against the proposal? Mr. Tarazi?
Does anybody here remember Mom, Grandma? They had this little envelope they used to put in front of them every week, and they used to put money in it. It was called a budget book. Well, that's all it took. Now, if you paid your rent, you paid your primary expenses first. And until they were paid, there wasn't any money to go into shoes, allowances, and all of that. That came about, the creature comforts came about later. Well, a year or 2 years ago, we voted in a $300,000 amount of money for roads. It was rebudgeted, it was sloughed off in other areas. Now, we were required a year or two ago, which of course I was opposed to on principle, the Vehicle Stabilization Fund. What that says is a bunch of guys saying, we don't have the discipline to control the budget and to put the money where it belongs. So we've got to have a little, somebody used the expression, lockbox, you know, like that other guy with his lockboxes. And then we got from there into, now we have a road stabilization fund coming up. What's next? We're going to have perhaps a recreation stabilization fund, a recreation department stabilization fund. We're going to have a library stabilization fund, a town hall stabilization fund. Stabilization funds are wrong in principle. It's not, it's just a way of somebody saying, we don't have the discipline that we should have to control your tax money the way that we're supposed to. In government, we have three essential services that we're supposed to, or four actually, if you want to, four essential services that we're supposed to provide for people. The public safety, you know, the police, fire, highway department, and schools. Now, there's a lot of frivolous money being spent on some of these other items that could have been shifted back into the highways or into the roads over the years, but the money, that $300,000 went the other way. So once again, in principle, we do not want any more stabilization funds because they're wrong. Now, as far as the highways go, always within the speed limit back there, guys, but I can navigate over any road in town without all of these problems that I hear people complaining about. I don't know what kind of cars you have or how you drive, but I don't seem to have a problem at all. And within the speed limit, I do go over quite a few of these roads. So that's it. We don't need a vehicle stabilization fund. Tell the town to give us back our money and put it into Vito's roads.
Thank you. Thank you, Mr. Tarazi. Any further discussion at the green microphone? Sir?
Yes, I'd like to amend...
State your name and your street for the record, please.
Jeff Berkner, 3 Wampanoag. I'd like to amend Article 25.
And do you have a written motion to amend?
Yes, I do.
Mr. Berkner, what is your motion?
I move to amend Article 25 as follows by inserting the following. After for purposes of, insert replacement repair. After public ways, insert the fund is to be used first for the public ways in the worst condition category as determined by the Department of Public Works.
So after public would...
Sure.
So purposes of replacement, comma, repair, comma, maintenance, paving, and striping of public ways, comma, and then what?
After public ways, the fund is to be used first for the public ways in the worst condition category as determined by the Department of Public Works. And I also have a deletion. After vote to create a road, delete maintenance, which essentially renames the fund. Yes, I do.
So the amended text of Article 25 would read as follows. To see if the town will vote to create a road stabilization fund in the town of Norfolk for purposes of replacement, repair, maintenance, paving, and striping of public ways. The fund is to be used first for the public ways in the worst condition category as determined by the Department of Public Works. Have I read that correctly, Mr. Berkner?
That's correct.
Is there any second to that motion to amend?
Second.
Thank you. Mr. Berkner, the floor is now yours. Is the yes microphone in support of your motion to amend?
Thank you. The DPW, first slide, please. Third slide. Next one. Okay. The DPW is categorized. Thank you. The DPW has categorized the condition of our roads into new, excellent, good, fair, and poor. I'm sorry, good, fair, poor, and failed, as listed on the left. The roads categorized as new initially do not need any maintenance. In an ideal situation, on the left, the state Chapter 90 money, combined with town budget funds, would pay for the maintenance of all excellent, good, and fair roads. Roads would be properly maintained, so there would not be any failed or poor. The existing situation on the right shows that the Chapter 90 money and town budget funds are barely enough to maintain only the excellent roads, and possibly a small part of the good roads. The fair, poor, and failed roads, to quote the DPW, quote, will probably be the last to be served, quote, which means essentially that they would not get done. Also, the amount of money available each year fluctuates, and a specific amount cannot be counted on. Last year, the town's contribution toward road maintenance was only $1. Next slide, please. Article 25, as written, does not specify a priority for the use of the stabilization fund. We learned during an advisory committee meeting that according to the DPW, they would use the funds of the road stabilization fund in the same priority as the road program, shown in blue. That maintains the better roads first. Again, the fair, poor, and failed roads will probably be the last to be served, which still means they would not get done. The proposed amendment, shown on the right, would reverse the priority using the stabilization fund first for the roads in the worst condition category. The failed roads would be repaired before money could be used for the poor roads, pardon me, and then the fair roads, etc. In the amendment, adding the words replace and repair and removing the word maintenance from the fund's name denotes the fund should include care of the lower category roads. It is further clarified with the statement to be used first for the roads in the worst condition category. Each condition category will have a number of road segments, but could be further prioritized by the amount of traffic or use. The DPW will be responsible and accountable as roads are under their auspices and they have the most up-to-date information. Each year, the DPW would suggest the roads to be replaced, repaired, or maintained by this stabilization fund. Town meeting would have the opportunity to debate and vote on the DPW's recommendations before the money could be spent. I do need to point out one drawback to reversing the priority. More miles can be maintained for a given amount of money if the maintenance is performed on better roads instead of failed roads, because the cost per mile is less to maintain a good road versus to replace a failed road. However, since we already have many failed roads, unless we reverse the priority, they might never get replaced. And they will need to be replaced eventually. So the sooner we start, the less overall cost to the town, since costs always increase over time. This road stabilization fund, as amended, is what the town needs now to begin to fix our worst roads. I urge you to vote for this amendment. Thank you.
Thank you, Mr. Berkner. Mr. Birmingham? You're speaking in support of the amendment, Mr. Birmingham?
Yes, sir.
Okay, thank you. Before I call you, does anybody wish to speak against the amendment? Mr. Talon?
Yes, Jay Tallerman, Chickadee Drive. My only concern with the amendment is it does create almost a situation where we are by referendum deciding which roads to repair, and I would suggest the better way to prioritize is which roads need to be repaired to most effectively protect public safety, not which are in the worst conditions. And I worry that some roads that might be in the worst condition aren't really the ones that we have to repair most to protect public safety. So for those reasons, I would suggest that the amendment's a little overreaching. Thanks.
Thank you, Mr. Talman. Mr. Birmingham, the green light.
2 points. Just like to say that my perception is that Mr. Tarazi, who spoke in opposition, other than the word stabilization, would support the notion that the roads are not being maintained properly. And I would also say, in reference to Mr. Tallman's statement, that in fact, that's what has been happening around town. The roads that have the higher percentage of possible safety events, related accident events happening, have gotten the most attention, and they've been updated quite recently.
Thank you, Mr. Birmingham. Any further discussion at the red microphone? Anybody wish to speak against the amendment? So, Mr. Walton, just come right down the line up with your microphone, and depending on your proclivities. Mr. Walton.
I guess I have a concern on the amendment. If I understood what it said, not being able to see it, I believe the amendment actually included the word worst. Am I correct?
Is it the amendment that reads, to see if the town will vote to create a road stabilization fund in the town of Norfolk for purposes of replacement, repair, maintenance, paving, and striping of public ways. The fund is to be used first for the public ways in the worst condition category as determined by the Department of Public Works.
The problem I have is that the model that I gather DPW uses and the petitioner has shown here, I don't see any reference to the word worst. So what the article is doing is placing a non-modeled scientific process that has very specific conditions with a purely subjective word that doesn't relate to this model. Unless somebody can tell me in there that that model, it does indeed classify somewhere the worst roads, to me then we are opening up to town meeting a very subjective debate. So I'm very concerned about using a word in the authorizing language that is not within the model that is being represented. I mean, if it said, you know, something to the effect of has to go to either a fair, poor, or failed road, but it's very difficult when you link subjective language into an authorizing thing that's going to guide our behavior for the next umpteen years. And then my other real concern is if you do make this process subject to town meeting, I would suggest that all of us will have to buy tents and sleeping bags, because you can count on every year's allocation, every year's appropriation from the stabilization fund for the worst roads being subject to the vote of town meeting as 2 to 3 night process in and of itself, as everybody in this room probably has their own definition of the worst road here in town, and I would bet good money on the fact that that road is probably the one in front of their house, whatever its condition may be. I mean, at 5% being failed, that's not most of the roads in town. That's 5% of the roads in town as failed. So I think you need to think long and hard about, is that indeed a process that you want town meeting subject to the appropriation? But again, I think the word worst either has to be somehow incorporated into the model or has to be taken out of this language.
Thank you, Mr. Waldman. Mr. Berger for the second time at the green microphone.
Thank you, Mr. Moderator. It doesn't say the worst road, it says the worst condition category as determined by the Department of Public Works. So for example, their categories they're using at this time would be new, excellent, good, fair, poor, failed, which I don't know if we really need to specify in the warrant. Use it for failed first, use it for poor next, use it for fair next, etc. I think we can pretty much figure out what that means. Also, it's not to say that the absolute worst road needs to be the one that gets included on the list. I did want to give the DPW some leeway there and say basically of the failed roads, they would suggest which roads would be most likely the ones to be repaired. So for example, if there was a road that did not get much traffic, you would certainly put that as a lower priority. Or there may be other means of determining the list, which I'm not aware of. So basically, it would allow some flexibility with the DPW to do that. As far as having town meeting drag on and on, and I guess DPW can sort of decide how to do this. I would imagine they would come through with several lists, like this is the one we suggest. These are some alternates. I certainly don't want to have a contest in town residents to discuss the list for 3 days. And for what it's worth, even though we live near Mohegan, I don't consider that, probably get shot by the neighbors, but I don't consider that the worst road in town, and certainly the DPW has their own idea of what the worst or most important priority would be. I guess I'm bringing this amendment because I don't think it's been working before. We always have a budget shortfall. I'm just concerned that we'll get farther and farther behind, and so that we'll have, over time, more and more, everything will degrade, or not everything, but some more will degrade into failed, and so eventually we'll have a much bigger bill because it will now, let's say you put it off for 10 years, costs will go up, and I really think we're digging ourselves into a hole. And I know there's never enough money, but I think this amendment will at least get some of the failed roads repaired.
Thank you, Mr. Berkner.
We haven't been able to do that by the methods we've used so far. Thank you.
Thank you, Mr. Berkner. At the red microphone, Ms. Connors.
Nancy Connors, Everett Street, which is really Route 1B. Mark really much covered most of the things that I wanted to say, and I totally agree with what he did say. But bottom line is, we are paying a professional man in this town, Butch Vito, to decide what is the best way to disperse this money to repair our roads. It isn't up to us sitting on this floor, just as Mark said. It's got to be mine's the worst, yours is the worst, and maybe the worst isn't the one to do. For heaven's sakes, we pay a professional to do this for us. Let's let him do it.
Thank you, Ms. Connors. Mr. Birmingham, for the second time on the amendment.
I'd just like to point out that the advisory board voted unanimously in the affirmative to support this particular article.
Thank you, Mr. Birmingham. Any further discussion at the red microphone? Mr. Lavin.
Questions? No.
Question?
As I said this last year, roadways are an asset. It's no different than a town hall. You got to take care of them. Obviously, there's been some issues. When Mr. McGee came on, first thing I saw is him out there with a couple guys. Now, that was progress I've seen since I've lived here. So there's two things, actually. And probably ask Mr. Vito to explain. I'm a civil engineer and professional engineer. This is the business I'm in, as far as construction materials. There's science to this, and I'm sure they have a master plan, which I'm probably going to ask for. They probably have the roads evaluated, which I think Mr. McGee did, and there's a method to it. It's not just, this is a bad road, that's a bad road. It's really, you got to walk the roads and review it. Mass Highway has a formula for it, and Federal Highway does, and maybe Mr. Vito can explain that formula as far as determining roads and what's required. And also, probably the other question I'd have is, if we're going to spend this money, can we get some testing involved with that? Basically what that means is, you go spend 200 grand on something, there's a lot to asphalt. There's a whole science to it. Is it compacted right? Does it have a right amount of asphalt? Does it have too much wrapping or too much filler in it? There's all kinds of things. And even if you don't test it, have it in there so you test it. And same thing goes with planning board. Because you're paying someone 200 grand, it looks black and smooth and nice. It's supposed to last 30 years. Let's say 20. But, if it's not compacted right, the water gets in, I'm not going to go in, the water gets in and freeze thaw. So if you could explain the Mass Highway and federal guidelines, and if you could address testing.
Thank you, Mr. Lavin, with a question. Anybody else at the green microphone who wishes to speak in support of the amendment?
Yes, Mr. Moderator, Bob Frazier from 11 Mohegan Street. First of all, I'd like to commend two citizens in the neighborhood who stood up and raised this article before town meeting. Took a lot of initiative for Marguerite and Jeff to do that. I think it's something that the graphics in the board really display that show that DPW is doing the best they can with the funds that are available, but it's a top-down basis. They're trying to preserve and utilize that funding in order to maintain the roads to the best of their efforts with the money available, which gets shorter and shorter over time. What this article tries to do is to basically work from the bottom up. And I think that has to be left up to the discretion of DPW. I don't think anybody on the worst road category, I'd like to run Mohegan for the worst road, but I'm sure there are other people that would like their road on that list as well. But I certainly would not argue the point with anybody, as long as there was an effort to try to get these roads done. What I see from the graph on the left, there's no hope. You know, we might as well throw a bottle in the ocean as far as seeing any improvements to our roads. It's not happening under the current system. What this does is give the people an opportunity to see some hope. You know, a $12 million fix isn't going to happen here either. $200,000 a year is something I think that the town can afford. Assets have been brought up. I think our assets on Mohegan Street, which was built in the early 70s, over almost 40 years, are depreciating. So I appreciate any support this meeting could give to start working at this from the bottom up.
Thank you, sir. Any further discussion at the red microphone against the amendment? Mr. Tarazi, for the first time on this motion.
Is this counted as one or two, Mr. Moderator?
This is you get to speak twice in every motion, so since this is the motion to amend, this is your first time. But I can make it your second time.
Oh, no.
Go ahead, Mr. Tarazi,
No,
the floor is yours.
Actually, I was going to make it a question if I could get a free ride on it, but, but here's the comment. We're discussing this amendment, but what I hear us discussing, I'm sure it's all done in good faith, we're discussing procedures. We're discussing things that our Department of Public Works director can, and he's the only person that can really sit down and say, okay, here's what our jobs are, here's what we're supposed to do. He takes orders from the selectmen. He takes orders from other town officials in town. I see what we're discussing here in procedures as it's just a waste of time. We're spinning our wheels because it doesn't really get us anywhere with this stuff about worst roads, best roads, worst words, and all of that. I'd just like to get the amendment over with and I get back to brass tacks here with the regular article.
Thank you, Mr. Tarazi. Ms. Kevorkian at the green microphone for the first time on this motion.
Thank you. There is documentation in terms of research, and yes, the Department of Public Works has done an excellent job, especially recently under Bob McGee's efforts. I have in front of me a town-wide pavement and condition report, and as it's listed, to take care of the excellent roads, almost $300,000. To take care of the good roads, $2.5 million. To take care of the good roads, $3.7 million. To take care of the take care of the fair roads, $3.7 million, $3.6 million for the fair, $2.1 million, and do I need to go on? I mean, there are statistics, there are information. You saw the posters out in the front that put down condition indexes. I didn't develop that, they did, okay? All I'm doing is bringing it to light. The roads are failing. Planning board wants to bring things in. How are they going to bring things in when there's no roads to drive on? Who's going to go to those lovely retail places and commercial places when we can't even get to our schools and can't even get to work? We ought to be embarrassed about the condition of our roads. It is our asset. When I look at the front of my house, I want to see a beautiful street in front of my house. I want my friends to come visit and not say, we're not coming to your house because it's too difficult to get to all those pothole dodging. Okay? Are we really willing to wait until there's an accident where a child or an adult gets hurt? What's the town's liability then? That's why I brought this up. I didn't think it was fair that we were not putting forth money for road repair for the worst roads. I see potholes filled. Of course, they don't stay filled, but I see them filled. Okay? I think we need to start looking at what our foundation is and to address it. And I thought that this was the way to do it. Thank you.
Thank you, Ms. Kevorkian. Any further discussion at the red microphone regarding the amendment? Any further discussion at the green microphone? The motion pending on the floor of town meeting is to amend Article 25 to read as follows: to see if the town will vote to create a road stabilization fund in the town of Norfolk for purposes of replacement, repair, maintenance, paving, and striping of public ways The fund is to be used first for the public ways in the worst condition category as determined by the Department of Public Works. That is the motion that's on the floor. It requires a majority vote to amend. If you vote yes, you're voting to adopt that amendment. If you vote no, we're going to go back to Article 25 as it was originally printed in the town meeting warrant. All in favor of the amendment, say aye. Aye. Opposed, no? No. I'll ask the counters to come forward, please. And then same as before, David's just going to pick up the front of the room this time. I handled that last time. Okay, you ready? If you are in favor of the amendment, please stand up. And if you are in the middle of the corridor, face Ms. Nelson if you wish to be counted by her, Mr. Cronin if you wish to be counted by him, and no rotating. Mr. Cronin. 16. Mr. Rosenberg. 16. Ms. Nelson. Thank you. Be seated. Mr. Rosenberg, he got the two up there. Yes. If you are opposed to the amendment, please stand. Counters? Mr. Cronin. 23. Mr. Rosenberg. 23. Ms. Nelson. 21. Thank you. The vote is 41 yes, 67 no. It is not a vote. We'll return now to Article 25, as printed in the warrant. Article 25. Any further discussion on Article 25 as printed in the warrant? Mr. Johnson, at the microphone of your choice.
Hi, thanks. I'm in favor of Article 25, and the reason being that it hasn't been working. Last year I voted no to fund the road repairs because the year before we didn't do any of the road repairs, and I didn't want to spend any more bad money after bad money. So I like the idea of compelling people to spend the money as we deem fit. So when we come here to town meeting and we say we want this kind of money for fixing roads, that's where it should go. And I'm tired of not having that happen. I think it's disgraceful that it's come to this, that we have to actually bend people's arms in order to do what we told them to do in the first place. And I commend you, folks, for bringing this special fund, whatever it is, in order to compel the use of the funds as we voted. So I'm absolutely behind this. I think it's unfortunate that we have to resort to these measures, though.
Thank you, Mr. Johnson. Any further discussion at the red microphone against Article 25? Mr. Tarazi for the second time.
I'm in full agreement with everything you said, except for the setting up the stabilization fund. I'd much rather see town government, that is the people who are the movers and the shakers in town. I'd much rather see them stand up to the plate and give an order and mean it and get the work done that way than to set up, as I say, in principle, to set up these silly stabilization funds. To me, it's so childish. I mean, maybe it's the world I came from, but it's so childish to have to discipline yourself this way. My dollars go in this pocket, my pennies go in that pocket. That's what you're doing. And the next thing is what concerns me as much as that if you're going to vote, let me get my glasses on here, if you're going to vote on Article 25, then you can't get off the hook on 26. You're going to be giving up another $200,000 instead of going back to the boys up front and telling them, come up with the money the right way and appropriate it the right way. So I'm just one voice, the messenger. Thank you.
Thank you, Mr. Tarazi. Ms. Kevorkian at the green microphone for the second time.
Okay. First, may I say, based on the last comment that was made, that the fund is different than funding. And I think we need to take a look at those as two separate things. We're not discussing funding tonight. I see no problem. We're not taking any kind of monetary hit or decision-making tonight by establishing a fund. I think the gentleman who spoke before me in favor is right. It is our opportunity. This is our town meeting. It is our government. If we feel that we need a stabilization fund, which is allowed by law and was not allowed in 2001, because that's the comments I heard, why do this because it didn't work in 2001? Well, this is different. And yes, the money would be put in the box or the bank, so to speak, but at least we would know that we have the money for the roads and it's not going anywhere else but for the roads. So I would ask you to support this article so we can establish a stabilization fund for roads to attempt to take care of the roads to our homes, to our play, to our school, and to our work. Thank you.
Thank you, Ms. Kevorkian. Anybody wish to speak at the red microphone against Article 25? Anybody wish to speak further at the green microphone on Article 25? Mr. Boucher?
Excuse my delaying, Mr. Moderator, excuse my delaying town meeting to walk across from the red to the green.
Just talk faster, Mr. Boucher, that's all.
Okay, I will. As many of you know from previous town meetings, the vote that we took in 2001, the override for $300,000, has been a red cape to this bull. Every town meeting I get up and I say, let's spend the money for the roads. We voted it for the roads, let's spend it for the roads. Therefore, I thank the people who put this article on. I am totally in favor of the stabilization fund. At least any money that I vote for roads will go to roads.
Thank you, Mr. Boucher. Mr. Tomaszewski, Board of Selectmen.
I supported this article when it came in from the petitioner, and I want to commend them for the good job they did. If you read the advisory board recommendations, there's a comment in there about what has been spent since 2001 when we established that $300,000 and Bruce just commented on. Of that, we spent if we had spent the entire amount from that point in time, I think it was a little bit around $2.6 million. We actually spent $2.1 million, so the shortfall was $500,000, most of which occurred last year when we only budgeted $1. So the program was working. One other point to make about the issue of poor to bad, to good roads to fail. It's ironic that last year one of the roads to be fixed that we cut out when we went to $1 was Mohegan. So that just got put to the back of the pile for me and at the top of the pile as we go forward. $4 we spent. That's why I think we have to focus in on whether it's a formal program or not, some sort of plan to work on the poor to failed roads. Those people aren't getting any breaks on their tax dollars. They're paying full vote. If they're going to wait another 7 years for those streets to be fixed, I don't think that's right.
Thank you, Mr. Tomaszewski. I see no one at the red microphone. Mr. Rosenberg at the green microphone.
My name is David Rosenberg. I live on North Street. One of the speakers before me posing this suggested that in an ideal world we would not need this fund, that the funds would be appropriated by the selectmen or by the DPW and a stabilization fund would not be necessary. I wish I lived in an ideal world. Unfortunately, the world I live in isn't ideal, and the federal government, the state government, and the town government don't all do exactly what I would like them to do. And in a democracy, we have the ability to create regulations, or in this case, articles that direct the town to, or state or federal government, to take actions that we want. So I think in the spirit of successive refinement, to encourage the town to operate the way we'd like to, it's very reasonable to express what we want and in the form of an article, and we'll get closer to an ideal world by directing it that way. Thank you.
Thank you, Mr. Rosenberg. I see no one at the red microphone. Anybody further wish to speak at the green microphone? Mr. Sterling, Advisory Board.
I want to reiterate the Advisory Board's enthusiasm for establishing this road stabilization fund. We had similar enthusiasm for establishing a sidewalk stabilization fund and a vehicle stabilization fund. If you think this is an important thing to do for the town, then don't just create the fund, vote at the override.
Thank you, Mr. Sterling. Any further debate for or against Article 25 as printed in the warrant? Sir, Mr. Berkner, yes, you may come forward. You're first-time speaker on this motion.
Hi, Jeff Berkner, Wampanoag. Yes, I see we have spent, the $2.1 million. I think what was missing from the discussion was, I believe, and correct me if I'm wrong, we didn't have the comprehensive road condition list that we had, and we didn't have the comprehensive numbers that we now have in terms of what's needed for to properly maintain the roads. And yes, even though we've implemented most of the road program, I feel that, and I may be wrong, correct me if I'm wrong, that we have grossly underestimated what is actually needed for the roads, and that's why I think we need this fund, because we don't seem to have the priority by any other method other than to basically say, this is how we want you to spend this money to repair the roads, to maintain and repair the roads. Thank you.
Thank you, Mr. Berkner. Any further discussion for or against Article 25? Mr. Hathaway, Town Administrator.
I too support this article, and I commend the petitioner for bringing it forward. Petitioners, this is obviously there's been a lot of discussion. I think Butch in some ways has taken a lot of the chin here, and I just want to point out a couple of things. There was a lot of discussion back in 2001 when we had that override, and we talked about the different levels of override that was needed. And one level was to get all the roads up to par. Another level was to kind of maintain a status quo, and then another level was to do a minimum level. And the town supported us at the lower level. So I think everybody knew, we all have an override for what we can afford. At the end of the day, we can only fix what the money is appropriated. And again, the selectmen and George and I don't decide how this money is spent. Again, town meeting just makes a decision, ultimate decision. When we come back on the 16th of June, somebody wants to make a decision that we need to spend more money on the roads out of the general fund budget. We have the authority to do that. The moderator has given the guidelines how to take money from one budget and move it into another budget. That's up to you, and I urge you to do that if you think that is where your the town's priority should be, where your priorities. So again, I urge you to support this article. As Mr. Sterling had said, though it doesn't do us a whole lot of good if we don't go out and vote for the override. So I urge you to vote for the override when that time comes.
Thank you, Mr. Hathaway. Does anybody wish to speak against Article 25? Anybody wish to speak against Article 25? Hearing no further opposition, we're ready to put this to a vote. Article 25 is printed in the warrant is to create a road maintenance stabilization fund as printed in the warrant. If you vote yes, you're voting to support Article 25 and create the fund. If you vote no, you're voting against creating the fund. Because this is a vote to create a stabilization fund, it requires a 2/3 vote. If you vote yes, you're voting to support and to create the fund. If you vote no, you're voting not to create the fund. All in favor of Article 25, say aye. Aye. Opposed, no? No. It is a 2/3 vote. I will count it at the standing request of any 7 voters. Article 26 was deferred by earlier action of town meeting. Article 27, Mr. O'Barra. As Mr. O'Barra goes to the microphone, I want to thank the Norfolk Police and Firefighters Association, the Boy Scouts, Senator Brown, Representative Ross, the Norfolk Community League for their support of the free spaghetti supper at town meeting today. We appreciate their support of that community event. Thank you all. Mr. O'Barra.
Mr. Moderator, I move that we defer Article 27 for further discussion until after Article 79.
Thank you. That would be after Article 6 as now deferred. Is that correct, Mr. O'Barr?
That's correct.
The proposal, the motion on the floor, is there a second? Second. Motion is to defer Article 26 until after Article 6. Sorry,
27.
Article 27. Article 27 until after Article 6, which is now the last article at the deferred agenda. Any statement in support, Mr. O'Barr?
This article requires a public hearing, which will take place prior to the town meeting scheduled on June 16th.
Thank you. Any further discussion in favor of the motion to defer? Any discussion against? All, if you vote yes, you're voting to defer this to the end of the warrant after Article 6. If you're voting no, we'll keep it in order as it is and we'll deal with it immediately. All in favor of the motion to defer, say aye. Aye. Opposed, no. It is a majority vote. Article 28, Mr. Sterling, Advisory Board.
Mr. Moderator, I move we approve Article 28 as written in the warrant.
Mr. Sterling, Advisory Board, recommendation?
Mr. Moderator, the town established the 43D expedited review process last year. That review process imposes an obligation on the town to complete its review of a development proposal within the specified district within 180 days. The proposed council is intended to facilitate the coordination of the various departments, various interested parties in the town, to ensure that the town can meet that 180-day timeline.
Thank you. This is an article submitted by the Economic Development Committee. Does anybody from the Economic Development Committee wish to speak in support of Article 28? Mr. Nicodemus.
Bob Nicodemus, Economic Development Committee. We have attended a couple of these meetings as we prepare for this. We, the Economic Development Committee, were involved in the original creation with town government to get Chapter 43D accepted for the Southwood Hospital property. This whole process is one which we believe, with this council and this committee, will allow a smoother program for obtaining a decision in the Approvals and Land Use Board's decision, and we are in favor of this committee. If we need to have further explanation, either myself or someone else can speak to that.
Thank you, Mr. Nicodemus. This is a zoning amendment. Does the Planning Board have a recommendation? Mr. Burke, for the Planning Board.
The Planning Board would actually like to make a couple small substitute corrections on this article. It should be in the letter we provided. In essence, what we would like to do under establish, we want to strike the word 10 and the number 10 and change that and make that a quorum of 6. Additionally, under the committee, under the letter D, E, F, and G, where it talks about the chairman of the Board of Health, Conservation Commission, Planning Board, and the ZBA, we would recommend that it be changed to add at the end, or the designee from their board or commission. That way there it does provide some freedom if on a situation arises where the chairman is unavailable in that 30-day period to attend that meeting, or if there's somebody else who is maybe a project manager for that project that's coming forward to sit in on that meeting.
Thank you, Mr. Burke. Before we entertain further, I just want to inquire of Town Council on the proposal to change the number of members from 10 to the description a quorum of 6. A quorum, Mr. Council, is majority plus one of a 10-member board. Is that correct?
Well, it's a majority of the board.
So 5 would be a quorum?
10 alone, 6 members would constitute a quorum.
Right, and 5 would not.
Correct.
So, Mr. Burke, just to clarify, I want to make sure I understand, the Planning Board's proposal, a quorum of 6 is the same thing as saying a 10-member committee, so there's no difference from what you're proposing, but by specifying just a quorum, it's a backhanded way to say 10. So
Well,
would the Planning Board be comfortable submitting a proposal to simply add designees of the chairs for health, conservation, planning, and zoning, or would you want to press quorum of 6?
I think we at least need to use the phrase quorum as the way this is read. You can have at least 10 members, but it's the discretion to add additional members to this committee. So I think if we left it at 10, we're not actually encompassing everybody that actually could be in there. That was the desire to add 6 and a quorum.
I see. So as I understand it, the proposal is to have a committee that has an open-ended membership?
Well, if you look at what's proposed here by the EDC, they say 10 members, but if you count A through K, that's actually 11. So we didn't feel that 10 was appropriate.
Okay, thank you. I have a motion. I'll take the letter from the planning board as the motion to amend. The motion to amend is to strike in H41, where it references 10 members, strike the word and the number 10 and substitute the phrase a quorum of 6 with the digit 6. And then on D, E, F, and G, where it references chairman of the various boards, to add in the phrase or their designee from their board. Have I stated that correctly, Mr. Burke? That's correct. Is there a second to that motion? Second. Thank you. That motion to amend is now before the town meeting. Mr. Burke, anything further in support of that, or do you simply wish to defer?
As I had said, the planning board is fully in support of this article, and with the amendments that we actually made, we feel that this is a strong step forward, and we appreciate the work that's been done on this.
Thank you. Mr. Nicodemus, would the Economic Development Committee be willing to accept those as friendly amendments? Yeah. Those are accepted as friendly amendments. The motion as amended is to, on Article 28, to change 10 to a quorum of 6, and then to allow the chairs to appoint their designees from their boards in their place. That's the only change substantively on Article 28. That is the article as amended before town meeting. Anybody wish to speak against Article 28 as amended? Anybody wish to speak in favor? Mr. Tarazi.
This is with regards to Article 28?
Correct.
Once again, you know, folks, I know I'm playing on an empty house, but we're tap dancing on quicksand when we're doing things like this. What we're doing is we're giving away a lot of our rights to consolidate them. Now, the words that are used by people that are trying to speed up the process, they call it streamlining, they call it accelerated processes and so on. It's better for the developers, they tell us. It gets the work done better, it gets the work done more quickly, but is it as efficient? With a group that I'm looking at right here, it's going to take a lot of the protection out of a lot of these devices that we have to protect the town. It's going to take it out and it's going to put it into the hands of the chosen few. And they will be beyond reproach. They can't be approached for this, and they'll have the final say on it. It's almost as though instead of, when we're talking about making amendments and suggesting things, it's almost like we want to have a title in here, chairman of the party or something, because that's the direction we're going in. I know I can't talk you out of it, but I just wanted to give you my piece. We don't really need it. It's going in the wrong direction.
Thank you, Mr. Tarazi. At the green microphone, Mr. Rosenberg.
I'd like to propose a very small and I believe friendly amendment in the fourth line that now ends, "This includes but not limited to." I'd like to insert the word "is" after "but," so "this includes but is not limited to."
Let's see, there's a typographical error. It appears in the fourth line down. The sentence that begins, "This includes but not limited to," and your proposal, Mr. Rosenberg, is to insert the word "is" between includes and but. So it says, "This includes," after but.
Right.
"This includes but is not limited to."
Yes, that's
Is that accepted as a friendly amendment by the Economic Development Committee, that typographical change? It is so accepted. The motion still is pending before town meeting with those minor typographical changes. At the green microphone, anybody further? Mr. Bullock, Building Commissioner.
This article is made up for the 43D priority development sites, which is right now is only Southwood. This committee that's being presented is only to look at the application that is presented under a 43D project and to make sure that that application is complete. And this committee will deem it, once this committee deems it complete, then it goes to the various boards to do the review process in 180 days to make a decision. And under 43D, the boards are agreeing that they're going to make a decision either yes or no on these projects within a 180-day period. But there is a 20 business days that the application is reviewed to determine whether or not it's complete, and that's basically what this committee will be doing. So we're not giving up any of our control. We're just looking at whether or not these applications are complete.
Thank you, Mr. Bullock. At the red microphone, Mr. Tallerman.
It's not a comment against or for, it's just a question. It says, at the discretion of the town administrator or other town or agents, officials or agents can be appointed, including the town's engineer capitalized and town's planner also capitalized, and we don't have either of those. And I'm wondering what's intended.
Thank you. Mr. Talman, anything further?
No, it's just a question.
Thank you. At the green microphone, Mr. Sneed.
This also is neither a positive or negative, but a question. I'm befuddled a bit by the quorum language. 6 is a quorum for 10, it's a quorum for 11, but nothing higher than 11. So is it truly the intent to limit the membership to either 10 or 11, nothing else?
To clarify it, Mr. Hall, Town Council, if a quorum is specified in a zoning bylaw that is the quorum, without specification, it would be a majority of the board. Is that correct?
I think it's further complicated by the fact that this amendment isn't just specifying the quorum, it says the board shall consist of a quorum of 6, which doesn't really make any sense at all. I mean, the board is going to consist of a particular list of people. You could state separately that a particular number or subset of that group could be considered a quorum for purposes of taking action, but I have some difficulty with the language as proposed to specify that the board should consist of a quorum of 6.
Looks like this is going to require a bit of drafting. Perhaps the moderator would accept a motion to defer this to the June continued meeting and have some more detailed amendment language done on this, because it's hard to draft bylaws in the floor of town meeting, folks. Is there any reason why we shouldn't do that, Mr. Bullock, for the proponents?
Well, I would just add that it's of at least a quorum of 6. So being the members, having 10 people there, the quorum is 6. If there's more people added to the committee, which would be either 12 or 13, depending on what the town administrator decides, then the quorum number would rise according to what the law is, I would assume. We're just saying that the quorum, at least a quorum of 6.
Thank you. Red microphone, Mr. Tallerman.
Right, and I'm sure what town meeting needs more of is 2 lawyers talking about what's legal or illegal. But I think, and this is maybe Mr. Sneed's point as well, is if you do add at the discretion of the town administrator 2, 3, 4, 5 other people, you have a quorum that's below the majority, and I don't see how it would be possible to ever take action. There's other complications which I won't bore a town meeting with, but it seems like deferral at the least is a good idea.
Thank you. Any further discussion for or against? I do not have a motion pending to defer this to the end of the warrant, so we'll continue apace. The motion is to approve Article 28 with the various friendly amendments as have been referenced at town meeting to this point. Mr. Nicodemus in the green microphone.
The Economic Development Committee is not opposed to deferring this till we can clarify the language involved. We really are just positively wanting to see this article move forward.
Thank you. Do you so move, Mr. Nicodemus, to defer this to after Article 27? Do you move to defer this Article 28 until after Article 27 at the continued session of town meeting? Yes. Is there a second? Second. I'll waive the written notice. Any further discussion for or against deferring Article 28? All in favor of deferring Article 28, say aye. Opposed, say no. It is deferred till after Article 27 at the end of the warrant. I would commend further conversations with town council and the affected parties to come back with a comprehensive amendment for ease of future debate. Article 29 is Mr. Ibarra for the advisory board.
Mr. Moderator, we move to approve Article 29 as printed in the warrant.
Thank you. Mr. Ibarra, the recommendation for the advisory board.
The advisory board recommends approval of this article. This article amends the section of the zoning bylaws to add off-street parking requirements for medical and dental offices, which is otherwise not currently defined. The Zoning Bylaw Study Committee has determined that medical practices have distinct and unique parking requirements that differ from other businesses, say retail. The proposed requirements take into account the office's necessary staffing as well as patient traffic on a typical day and would apply to all parts of town.
Thank you, Mr. Ibarra. Does anybody from the Zoning Bylaw Study Committee wish to comment further? Any opposition to Article 29? Anybody wish to be heard in debate? Questions on Article 29? It's a zoning bylaw change, requires a two-thirds vote. All in favor of Article 29, say aye. Aye. Opposed, no. It is a unanimous vote. Article 30, Mr. Ibarra.
Mr. Moderator, I move to approve Article 30 as printed in the warrant.
Thank you, Mr. Ibarra. Recommendation from the advisory board.
The advisory board recommends approval of this article. This article amends said sections of the zoning bylaws to differentiate off-street parking requirements of larger versus smaller commercial units, and therefore easing requirements for units with less than 5,000 square feet.
Thank you. Any further discussion by the Zoning Bylaw Study Committee? Mr. Burke, my apologies for skipping over the planning board on the last zoning article. Is there any further comment by the planning board on Article 30, a zoning change?
Just that the planning board does recommend approval of this article. It does apply to a type of business that usually has less traffic and does require less parking.
Thank you, Mr. Burke. Any further discussion for or against Article 30? It's a zoning article. It requires a two-thirds vote. All in favor say aye. Aye. Opposed, no. It is a two-thirds vote. Article 31, Mr. Ibarra.
Yes, Mr. Moderator, we move to approve Article 31 as printed in the warrant.
Thank you, Mr. Ibarra. With the recommendation of the advisory board.
Yes, indeed. The advisory board recommends approval of this article. This article eliminates the need for a special permit granted by the Zoning Board of Appeals for restaurants which serve beer, wine, or alcoholic beverages. This removal eliminates the redundancy and procedures that currently exist since the Board of Selectmen issues all liquor license in town. Both the Board of Selectmen and Zoning Board of Appeals support this change.
Thank you, Mr. Ibarra. Mr. Burke, I take it the planning board concurs in the recommendation? We do. Thank you very much. We'll waive the reading. Any further discussion in favor or against Article 31 as submitted to town meeting? It is a zoning change. Article 31 requires a two-thirds vote. All in favor say aye. Aye. Opposed, no. It is a two-thirds vote. I will count it at the request of any 7 voters. Article 32, Mr. Ibarra.
Yes, Mr. Moderator, I move we approve Article 32 as printed in the warrant.
Thank you. And Mr. Burke, this is Mr. Ibarra, the recommendation from the advisory board?
Indeed. The advisory board recommends approval of this article. It's submitted by the Zoning Bylaw Study Committee at the request of the Conservation Commission. This article amends sections F9B1A to allow one freestanding sign on town-owned property to advertise the name and its purpose or function. This change will enable the town to identify the Lind property to encourage recreational use of town-owned land.
Thank you, Mr. Burke. The recommendation of the planning board on a zoning change?
It is the planning board's recommend that this article be approved. It will help clearly identify town properties.
Thank you. Any further discussion for or against Article 32? Mr. Lutz. At the...
Yeah, Dave Lutz, Pondview Road. I'm also chairman of the Conservation Commission. I think as a point of clarification, we as a commission, didn't request this, so I'm wondering where that information came from. We are the managing entity, if you want to call it that, for the Lynn Farm, and therefore, I think the mounting of a sign would require approval, but this was not put before us, so I'm just wondering where that information came from.
Thank you. Any further discussion? Mr. Bullock, Building Commissioner?
It just came from me. You know, I've been approached by different organizations to put in these different signs, and following the sign bylaws of the town, it just, there isn't, they don't have the ability right now in zoning to do that. So this is just going to give the ability for, like, the Conservation Commission or the Recreation Commission to put signs up on town-owned property, to name them and to state the purpose of them.
Thank you, Mr. Lutz, for the second time at the red microphone.
So this would just allow for the commission or other entities to request signs rather than...
Thank you, Mr. Bullock.
It's not
Answer the
directly
question.
related to the Lynn Farm, for instance.
Right. That was just used as an example. This is, they would have to come and pull a building permit to put up the signs, but they'd be allowed.
Very good. Thank you, gentlemen. Any further discussion for or against, ma'am? Ms. Terrio? No, who's that?
Cindy Andrade, Worcester Road.
Apologies, Ms. Andrade.
Former Conservation Commission member. I'm reading this and it's saying allowing only one sign, and in my view, that's a problem because many of the town-owned properties have two entrances, and often both entrances should be identified. Sometimes signs are needed within the town property to direct people in the proper way to go. So I think there's a need for more signs than one to potentially be allowed.
Thank you, Ms. Andrade. Any further discussion for or against Article 32? Article 32 is a zoning change that requires a two-thirds vote. If you vote yes, you're voting to amend the zoning bylaw as written in the warrant. If you vote no, you're voting to keep the article, keep the zoning as it now is in the town of Norfolk. All in favor of Article 32, say aye. Aye. Opposed, no? No. It is a two-thirds vote. Article 33, Mr. O'Barra.
Mr. Moderator, I move we approve Article 33 as printed in the warrant.
Thank you, Mr. O'Barra. The recommendation from the Advisory Board?
Yes, sir. The Advisory Board recommends approval of this article. This article allows waivers for lot area, frontage, or lot shape requirements in exchange for the construction of restricted affordable housing. Currently, no board can provide such waivers. There are approximately 50 lots in town that could be used and added to the town's inventory of affordable housing, and Habitat for Humanity is anxious to work with the town in building homes.
Thank you, Mr. O'Barra. Mr. Burke, this is a zoning matter. What is the recommendation of the Planning Board?
The Planning Board recommends approval of this article, as the bylaw's intent is to keep some dimensional requirements while still promoting affordable housing within the community. However, we would like to make an amendment to the article. Under applicability, under number 2, the second sentence, we would like to strike "or 2." So it would read, construction of a single-family dwelling. And then under...
Sorry, Mr. Burke, could you...
Yep.
Which section are you on?
Applicability, number 2, we would strike the words "or 2." So the second sentence would read, appeals, comma, the construction of a single-family dwelling.
Oh, I see. So striking or the reference to two-family dwelling.
Correct.
So the proposed change by the
have-
Planning Board
And
is
that
to
we-
use this article to allow the construction of single-family dwellings, but not two-family dwellings.
Correct, and that would also fall under requirements number 5. The end of the sentence would also, we would need to strike "or 2."
And similarly, on Part 5, striking the words "or 2," so it would not have the possibility of single or two-family homes, but only single-family homes under the zoning proposal.
That's
Is
correct.
that your proposal? Do you
That
have-
is.
And I'll take your, is that in your
Yes, it is.
proposal? Okay,
Yes.
thank you. I'll take your proposal as a written motion. The motion on the floor is to amend Article 33 by deleting in parts 2 and 5 the reference to two, or two, meaning two-family homes, and so as amended would only read one-family homes. Mr. Burke, does the planning board wish to speak further in favor of its amendment? First of all, is there a second to that amendment? Mr. Burke, would the planning board like to speak to that amendment?
This is consistent with what has been done, where we actually did go with affordable housing in new developments. We had passed the affordable housing thing a while back. It might have been 3 town meetings ago or so. And in that situation, we had talked about doing two-family dwellings as an option, and it was talked about at that point in time, well, what about in the remainder of the town? And the concern was, on these smaller lots, would we really be able to put in or want a two-family dwelling? Whereas in the new construction subdivisions with large lots and large homes, developers were concerned doing an affordable house on a 4,000 square foot house. It just wasn't going to work. When we had talked about this at that point in time, we had said, well, in the new subdivisions, it would make sense that they would have the ability to do a two-family home, but in the rest of the town, if it became an option, we would look just for a single-family dwelling.
Thank you, Mr. Burke. Does anybody wish to speak against the amendment? Seeing no one at the red microphone, does anybody wish to speak in favor of the amendment? At the green microphone, Mr. Tallerman?
I was actually already over at the green microphone, but I have just a counterpoint.
Do you wish to speak against the amendment? Please, just to humor me. You just thought you were going to get to the green microphone tonight, Mr. Tallerman. Floor is yours, Mr. Tallerman.
I wrote this bylaw with Bob and the rest of the zoning bylaw study committee. It's a special permit, and the permit granting authority can choose whether or not a two-family dwelling would be appropriate given the size and shape of the lot. The rationale for including a two-family is that when we build houses here in this town, they're basically large, huge, generally, houses. And when you're doing some affordable housing, you have an opportunity to do, say, 2 1,200, 1,400-foot houses in a duplex-type arrangement. That provides not only additional houses for our subsidized housing inventory, but also provides another family with another house within a footprint that still works on the lot. That was the rationale for it. It works. I just finished and did an affordable housing lottery for an affordable housing project I did on Martha's Vineyard just yesterday, and we had 2 market rate houses next to a house that looked like a market rate house, but that we split in 2. 2 families got a house. So again, the intent isn't not to overburden any particular lot, but to provide an increased opportunity. The zoning board could still say no if it's too small of a lot.
Thank you, Mr. Tallerman. Anybody wish to speak in favor of the proposed amendment? Mr. Sneed for the advisory board.
Again, a technical nit, not really a for or against. It seems to me that the elimination of two-family in item 5 eliminates the need for item 5 entirely. And secondly, I'm wondering that such other reasonable after item 5, is that is intended to be a numbered item as well?
Thank you. Any further discussion for or against the amendment? Ms. Connors, come on down, folks. If you'd like to speak for or against, just line up at the appropriate microphone. Ms. Connors?
Since we're going, Nancy Connors, Everett Street, since we're going to ask the ZBA to approve possibly less than the setbacks, less than the street setbacks, and now we're talking about a two-family on an undersized lot, which probably is not going to have the proper setbacks to the homes beside it with a special permit. But this is going to require double the type of septic system required. I would assume that each of these homes has a minimum of 2 bedrooms. So you're putting in a 4-bedroom septic system. That's pretty good size. And all of this is going to have to be fit on a small, undersized lot. I have concerns about that.
Thank you. Thank you, Ms. Connors. Any further discussion? The amendment on the floor is to strike the references in the proposal to 2-family, leaving only 1 family. Does anybody wish to speak in favor of the amendment to strike 2-family? Mr. Roach.
Dave Roach again, School Street. The planning board wasn't opposed to this, the two-family aspect of this. if the lot the two-family was going on was conforming. So the only zoning relief that it would need would be simply the use of the two-family. Our concern was the same, that you were putting a two-family on a non-conforming lot that needed dimensional relief as well.
Thank you, Mr. Roach. Anybody who wishes to speak against the proposed amendment? Mr. Bullock?
Just under a special permit, they can put conditions on these. If it's going to be a two-family, they can make sure that it looks like a single family. They could make sure that the lot is conducive to the size of the building. So, you know, a lot of this is, probably puts a little bit of a burden on the ZBA to make those type of decisions, but, you know, we would have that protection. It wouldn't necessarily be that on these very small lots, they still have to meet all the setback requirements, but they also could say that, you know, the lot's just not big enough for a two-family, and we're going to keep it to a single family and have those options. So we don't have any other option to put a two-family in town, so, at this point.
Thank you, Mr. Bullock. Has anybody not yet had a chance to speak to this who wishes to speak to the amendment? The amendment is to strike, to eliminate the references to two-family from the Article 33. If you vote yes, you're voting to take away, to delete references to two-family. If you vote no, you're voting to leave two-family in, and then we'll go back and vote and debate on the Article 33 as written in the warrant. All in favor of the amendment, please say aye. Aye. Opposed, no. No. It is not a vote. The Article 33 remains as printed in the warrant, including two-family. Does anybody wish to speak in favor of Article 33 as printed in the warrant? Mr. Tallerman.
See, I like it over here. It's all right. Look, Bob, I can't take credit for hatching this. Bob came up with the idea at our first zoning bylaw study committee meeting. I had done a similar bylaw for another town that I represent, whereby, and again, it's all special permit. We have a drastically low amount of affordable housing, which we need both to provide services for the families that can't afford it, as well as to get our numbers up. It seemed like a reasonable solution. The lots are not postage stamp size. It's all discretionary. The zoning board can still say no if they don't feel it's appropriate. We already discussed potential lots tonight. I think it's a good idea for the town to move forward and help some people that can't afford to live here otherwise.
Thank you, Mr. Tallerman. Does anybody wish to speak against Article 33? Anybody wish to speak in favor of it who has not had a chance to speak? Article 33 is a zoning amendment. It requires a two-thirds vote. If you vote yes, you're voting to change the zoning as printed in Article 33. If you're voting no, you're voting to keep the zoning as is. All persons in favor of Article 33, say aye. Aye. Opposed, no? No. It is a two-thirds vote. Article 34. Mr. O'Barra, for the record, we'll continue on until about 11 o'clock and knock off for the night. Mr. O'Barra, Article 34.
Mr. Moderator, I move we approve Article 34 as printed in the warrant.
Mr. O'Barra, recommendation from the Advisory Board?
Yes, the Advisory Board recommends approval of this article. Removing sections D3E1A and D3E1B from the special permit uses of the Watershed Protection District eliminates antiquated language and a duplicative approval process the Conservation Commission currently oversees.
Thank you. This is a zoning matter. Mr. Burke, for the Planning Board?
The Planning Board also recommends approval of this article as the Conservation Commission also reviews structures within 25 feet of a wetland, and the current requirement is duplicative.
Thank you. This is a proposal by the Zoning Bylaw Study Committee. Does anybody from the Zoning Bylaw Study Committee wish to be heard in support of the article? Anybody against? At the red microphone, or just a question, Mr. Tallerman?
No, it's kind of, on second thought, it's kind of nicer over here in some ways. I was the Conservation Commission's designee on the Zoning Bylaw Study Committee, and we had these a series of meetings leading up to the close of the warrant. This actually kind of misconstrues what our recommendations were. We were in favor to some potential limited changes in this zoning bylaw to eliminate some of the duplicative stuff that we are already cover at the Conservation Commission. The things that we were discussing were some requirements currently for special permits for wetlands crossing, which we can control fully. What this zoning bylaw, however, does, or the elimination of this zoning bylaw, eliminates some controls that the Conservation Commission does not have. For example, under wetlands bylaws, Conservation Commissions are use neutral. We cannot say what you can and can't do in a particular area. We can only regulate how you do it. What the zoning bylaw does And the reason why it was adopted is under zoning, you can control what uses you want in a particular wetland area. For example, under D3E1A, one of the ones they want to eliminate, it says any commercial, industrial activities or uses. The Conservation Commission can't say what kind of uses you want to do. That's for zoning. And I think it makes great sense, and this town meeting thought it made good sense not to cloud our wetlands with those types of uses. I think at the very least this should be deferred so it more accurately reflected whether or not this was duplicative with wetlands, but as it stands, it would eliminate protections for our wetlands, and I don't think it should be passed in its current form.
Thank you, Mr. Tallerman. Anybody at the green microphone? Mr. Bullock, Building Commissioner?
Yeah, we did discuss this, and, there was some parts of this that Jay wasn't in favor of, but the rest of the board had voted unanimously for it. The board, the Conservation Commission looks at anything that's within 100 feet of a wetland. They write up the notice of intent, they go through the whole process, and then it goes to the Zoning Board of Appeals for a special permit for that same use. And it's just causing people to go through another 3 or 4 month process that is already being dealt with pretty substantially by the Conservation Commission. Town Council had actually had written a letter to this effect, and I'd like to ask him if he could make some comments towards it.
Thank you. Town Council?
This topic came up a number of years ago when we passed a number of other changes to the overlay districts. There are 3 water-related overlay districts. We have a floodplain district, we have an aquifer protection district, and we have this watershed protection district. Both the aquifer protection district and the floodplain district are required in some form or fashion by state or federal regulations. The watershed protection district, in my estimation, it really dates back to the 1970s approach to using zoning to accomplish wetlands protection. Since the state Supreme Court decided that non-zoning wetland bylaws were legal in the late 70s, this approach generally has fallen into disuse. And I had gotten a number of questions through the years from the Board of Appeals about what they should be doing with some of these applications which seem to duplicate from a subject matter standpoint things that the Conservation Commission was already doing. My sense was that the zoning board was usually waiting for the Conservation Commission to finish their review, and then when that process was done, if the commission approved the project, the Board of Appeals would approve the special permit basically on identical terms. So it seemed to me that this put a process in place that didn't really add much substance and just required both the applicant and the Board of Appeals spending time doing over again what the Conservation Commission is already doing very thoroughly under state and local wetland bylaws. So my recommendation at that time was that there was certainly nothing in the law that required retaining these provisions, and that I didn't see a lot of utility in keeping them in the bylaw. It seemed to be an opportunity to me to streamline the permitting process, both freeing up time for the zoning board to concentrate on other things and for saving applicants the expense of another application for the same subject matter.
Thank you, Council. Any further discussion, debate on Article 34? Mr. Lutz.
David Lutz, Pondview Road, Chairman of the Conservation Commission. To reiterate what Jay said earlier, the particular uses that he highlighted, i.e. the commercial and industrial uses, are the kinds of things, as he said, we have no ability to prohibit. When this was put in place, it was put in place as an extra protection for our watershed areas against these kinds of uses. It allows for an extra review for certain kinds of uses. There may be an opportunity to eliminate some of the other uses that are discussed in this, i.e. the wetlands crossings, drainage infrastructures, etc. All of those we retain jurisdiction over, as has been identified. We cannot say no to a commercial building or an industrial building in a wetlands area. If they design it properly, it can't be said, but the reality is that it may be the kind of use that we may not want in those areas, which is why this thing was put in place in the first place. Thank you.
Thank you, Mr. Lutz. Any further discussion, debate in favor of Article 34? Mr. Hall, Council, Town Council?
In response to that, the watershed district limits activity within these overlays and within 25 feet of wetlands. The current commission regulations pretty much prohibit any building within 50 feet of wetlands. So as far as the use is concerned, it may not allow the commission to deny a commercial building because it's a commercial building, but the regulations pretty much already prohibit building of any kind within those areas. So what we're really frequently talking about is a practical matter of road crossings, because those fall within one of the exceptions to the state law that allow work through bordering to the wetlands. So if we're talking about this on a practical level, that's really what this mostly involves.
Thank you. Council, at the red microphone, Mr. Tallerman for the second time.
Yes, and George, you know, with all due respect, and again, sorry to subject town meeting to two lawyers debating a point, but you yourself have said the Conservation Commission's prohibitions within 50 feet, because they don't exist in the bylaw, are vulnerable. You have said that, and we actually grant exceptions to that principle for crossings and other things when there's no other viable alternative. What the zoning bylaw does, as Mr. Lutz said, and what I said earlier, is provide more stringent protections against the type of use, not the impact, but the type of use that this town meeting decided that they didn't want close to those wetlands, that type of use. So let's be careful what we say here, because you yourself have advised the Conservation Commission differently.
Thank you. Any further discussion or debate? Yes, sir. Mr. Advani.
Ramesh Advani, live off of a poor street called Park Street on Bush Pond Road. What you're just watching here is a classic example of what people who want to develop anything anywhere have to go through. They put through all kinds of hoops, which you're watching played out here between attorneys who are on different commissions and the town legal counsel. I would ask the zoning bylaw study committee members who were there from the Zoning Board of Appeals and the Conservation Commission, what was their position on this? And frankly, I think what we need to do is be very practical and not put people through hoops. I would be very much in favor of what is being suggested here, but I would like to know what the answer is to that question. What did the ZBA member and the Conservation Commission member of the Bylaw Study Committee, what was their position when you all discussed this?
Thank you, Mr. Advani. At the red microphone, Mr. Rosenberg.
Right. David Rosenberg, North Street. As I understood the comments from the town council and from Mr. Tellerman, there was clearly something that would satisfy both of them. That is, the town council seemed to want to eliminate the reference to the driveways, wetland crossings, and drainage infrastructures. And as I understood Mr. Tellerman, he wanted to keep the references to commercial and industrial activities. Therefore, I would like to propose that this, I'd like to amend this to, I'd like to propose a deferment of this until the June 16th meeting so that it could be redrafted to accommodate both Mr. Tellerman's and Mr. Hall's concerns.
Thank you. There's a motion to defer Article 34 until after Article 28, the end of the warrant. Is there a second? Second. Any further discussion? Mr. Rosenberg, in support of the motion to amend at the green microphone. It's how we know that people are awake at this time of night.
Again, there seem to be laudable goals on both sides of this, and it seems to be possible to accommodate both sets of the laudable goals, and therefore I'd like to see this redrafted so it does accommodate those goals. And as the moderator pointed out earlier, it's difficult to do the redrafting on the floor of the town meeting, and therefore it might be better to defer this to give time to do that redrafting.
Thank you. Article 34, the motion on the floor is to amend by deferring Article 34 to the end of the town meeting warrant, currently Article 28. Any further discussion for or against? It is a majority vote. All in favor of deferring Article 34, say aye. Aye. Opposed, no? No. It is not a majority vote. Article 34 remains before town meeting. I will count it at the standing request of any 7 voters. Article 34, any further discussion on Article 34? Hearing none. Article 34 is, Mr. Talaman, you had an answer to the question that Mr. Advani had posed?
Well, I'd yield to Mr. Kaliza because he hasn't spoken yet.
Thank you.
Thank you.
At the green microphone.
Mr. Moderator, Mike Kaliza, Creek Drive, Chair of the Zoning Board of Appeals, and also a member of the Zoning Bylaw Study Committee. The Zoning Bylaw Study Committee, which consisted of 7 members, voted unanimously to support this change. The Zoning Board of Appeals voted unanimously to support this change. And to answer Ramesh's question, from our view, it's a rubber stamp, unnecessary, wasting our time, developers' times. And also, I think people should recognize that our town council, George Hall, is one of the leading environmental attorneys in the state of Massachusetts. His peers elected him president of the environmental group. Correct me, George, what the exact title is. But if you listen to George carefully, he's saying that this is redundant, unnecessary, and a perfect example of why Norfolk has the reputation of being so difficult to get anything done. So I strongly urge you to support this.
Thank you. I think we've pretty much talked out. Mr. Talaman, you're up twice now. Do you wish to correct a misstatement or answer a question?
I'm here, as you suggested, to answer Mr. Advani's question as to the Conservation Commission's position and why I was in favor of Mr. Rosenberg's potential deferment, and that is that the Conservation Commission was in favor of some streamlining here to eliminate things that were truly duplicative. And frankly, the things that have come up, and the only things that have come up that have been duplicative, are the prohibitions regarding some wetlands crossings and some driveways. And we were in favor of modernization of that because we didn't want to stand in the way of people getting permits that would just be a second permit in that. What we weren't in favor of, and it was not unanimous, what we weren't in favor of, and what I stressed to the Zoning Bylaw Study Committee, was that there were no protections under the Wetlands Bylaws or the Wetland Protection Act that are of the type that existed with respect to the bylaw as it stands right now.
Thank you, Mr. Tallerman. This is a zoning article. Any further discussion or debate by anybody who's not yet had an opportunity to speak? No, thank you, Council. You've spoken twice on the motion. I will put this to a vote. On this matter, if you vote yes, you're voting to amend the zoning bylaw to adopt the change as written in the warrant. If you vote no, you're voting to keep the zoning bylaw as it currently is. All in favor of Article 34, say aye. Aye. Opposed, no? No. I'm going to call that as a 2/3 vote in favor. I will count it at the standing request of any 7 voters. I have 7 voters. Mr. Rosenberg will have you sit this one out because you spoke to it. Mr. Cronin and Ms. Nelson. Is Ms. Nelson still here? Mr. Nelson, I'll impress you as a counter. And Mr. Commendell, would you favor us with your count as well? Gentlemen, come forward. I'll swear you in. Raise your right hand, please. You all solemnly swear that you will truly and accurately count the vote as you observe it tonight here at town meeting as requested? Okay, thank you. Paul, if you would count the front of the room and the stage, and then the far left wing there, the far left section. Mark, if you could count this wing from the middle over, people will look at you, and George will count this side, people look at him. If you are in the middle here, just look in whichever direction of the aisle you wish to be counted, and the appropriate counter will count you. If you are in favor of Article 34, please stand. Thank you. Mr. Commendell, you'll count the front of the stage, and then up the aisle.
On the left, correct?
On the left, yeah.
I think Mark.
You got it?
You got to do it.
Right. Okay, Mr. Nelson, I want you to count this aisle facing inward to the middle, people facing you, and Mr. Commendell, I'd like you to count the stage, in front of the stage, and the left side. Remain standing if you are in favor of Article 34. Thank you, Mr. Cronin.
12.
Mr. Commendell.
23.
Mr. Nelson.
15.
Thank you. May be seated. If you are opposed to Article 34, please stand. Mr. Cronin.
13.
Mr. Nelson.
3.
Mr. Commendell.
6. Yeah, 6. I have.
He counted. Mr. Commendell. Mr. Commendell, your count was?
6.
Thank you. Be seated. The quantum of vote necessary for a two-thirds approval was 48. 50 votes voted in favor. 22 voted against. It is a two-thirds vote. Article 35, Mr. Sorry, excuse me. I'm sorry? Is there a motion to adjourn? Second. All in favor say aye. The motion is to adjourn until tomorrow night, 7 p.m. here. All in favor say aye, opposed no. The ayes have it. Town meeting is in recess, adjourned until tomorrow.